So welcome everyone to this episode of the Crypto Vakil Show. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Gopal Jain, Senior Advocate of Supreme Court of India. Mr. Jain's practice areas are infrastructure, telecommunications, technology, gaming, etc. He advises various sectors on policy and regulatory issues as well, and strategy on advocacy efforts with government, policymakers, and media. Welcome, Mr. Jain, to the Crypto Vakil Show.
Okay.
Today, we are going to talk about the upcoming legislation in Parliament on cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currency that was supposed to be introduced in the winter session. In fact, it was listed in the business of Lok Sabha on two occasions, in the budget session as well as winter session, but no bill was introduced in both the sessions. So, sir, we have a judgment of the Supreme Court in the form of IAMAI versus RBI in March 2020, which said cryptocurrencies cannot be banned. It was vis-a-vis RBI circular which was quashed, and it said cryptocurrencies cannot be banned by a mere circular, and it would impinge on the rights under Article 19(1)(g). So how do you see, the lawmakers, will they be taking cognizance of this Supreme Court judgment, and how should the bill that is going to be introduced in Parliament, hopefully very soon, shape up vis-a-vis this judgment?
Well, firstly, we have to recognize the fact that crypto is now a phenomena which has happened all over the world, including in India in a big way. We have a large number of users. So the first thing is you have to understand which is the sector which you're seeking to regulate or around which you're building a legislation, to understand the stakeholders and to understand the economics and the dynamics of that sector. Then you frame law stroke regulation. And naturally, this has to be within the constitutional parameters of lawmaking. And in this case, a judgment of the Supreme Court, which has considered this subject matter, apropos RBI circular, and come up with some guiding principles. For example, the doctrine of proportionality, which is essentially saying, seek to regulate, not ban or prohibit. And if you wish to go that route, there has to be much higher threshold. So all law making has to be within the principles and the ratio of judgments and the powers granted to the law making authority, i.e. Parliament, by the Constitution. And therefore, if you make a law, you would obviously want to make a valid law in conformity with constitutional principles, rather than make something which offends, falls foul, and is likely to be struck down.
But what we have gathered from press reports is that the RBI still has a very hardline position on cryptocurrencies, and they have a sort of a adverse view till date, at least as far as the public utterances of RBI are concerned and reports, etc. So should they actually go down the ban route? Do you see a challenge being made and good grounds for mounting a challenge on legal and constitutional grounds?
Firstly, the bill which is to be proposed to be introduced in Parliament is obviously legislative drafting. And that is done by a different set of people who are experts in the matter. And in any case, in such emerging new areas, lawmakers must turn to experts who can guide them in formulating the law. When that law is being formulated, you take into account viewpoint of the different set of stakeholders, in this case, including regulatory bodies, could be RBI, could be SEBI, could be other law enforcement agencies, so that you can try and address the concerns which they have, brackets, the mischief rule, within the formulation of the law. And equally, you look at industry, its stakeholders, and larger policy objectives and goals. For example, technology, innovation, investments, job creation are also very laudable public objectives. So sensible policies and sensible lawmaking will take all this range into account, not just a viewpoint. And that is the beauty about the law, that there is an extensive engagement process. It results in formulation of a bill. The bill is then presented in Parliament. there's a debate. Sometimes it goes to a standing committee, sometimes it goes to a select committee. So there's a whole parliamentary process which is built. And I think that must be a robust process and should be far-sighted and with a long-term perspective. And it's a collective exercise, a consultative exercise. So everyone's viewpoint should be expressed and taken into account before the final product, brackets open, is released and put in the public domain.
Absolutely, absolutely agree. And hopefully, from what I understand, all stakeholders are indeed being consulted, including the industry bodies on this. In
Sorry,
fact,
I just want to add one point, because the last part of your question. I also think it's very important to have what is called a legislative policy or an approach, and likewise judicial policy and approach. For example, even under the IPC, we don't go for the death penalty. That is the extreme punishment. It is rarest of rare. So a balanced, proportionate approach is always a preferred approach. So time has come for us as we transit into a digital future and a digital ecosystem and a new world with fast moving technologies and innovation in new sectors. Our approach should never be the maximalistic, the extreme measure approach. It must always be a graded, proportionate approach. So this approach is very important, not just in the context of crypto, but in the context of lawmaking and policy making. And I think that's very important message which can be sent at this time if this approach is adopted, and for which, as you indicated, we already have a precedent from the Supreme Court, which also recognized and applied this concept.
There is a view, within some in the government and even outside, that blockchain is good and crypto is bad. We should look at not look at crypto, but look at promoting blockchain technology. If supposing there is an adverse regulation on crypto, is it first even possible to divest the two, blockchain and crypto? And secondly, if there is an adverse kind of regulatory environment in India, how does it impact investment inflows and the investor sentiment, especially internationally?
So firstly, I think blockchain and crypto are quite inextricably connected in the first instance. And so it's very, very important, as we indicated earlier also, to make sure that our approach is a graded approach. So we cannot segregate blockchain and crypto. We want technology, we want innovation. We are making India a hub for this. And therefore, it's equally important to respect both. And also look at the number of crypto users we have in India, right? The number of buyers, etc., that we have. So we have to do a reality check. And that reality check becomes very important so that we don't run into any rough weather. After all, from the Supreme Court judgment to this potential bill and the debate raised, there's been a lot of sound and noise. Now time has come to put all that at rest and come up with a good, far-sighted, robust legislative stroke regulatory framework which supports your own policy goals and objectives which have been articulated, and like I said, addresses the concerns of various regulatory agencies, which can be done. I mean, let's take a very simple example. People drink alcohol, get drunk. You don't say, let's ban alcohol, right? So there are ways and means, what I call checks and balances, control, supervision, monitoring, and deterrent punishment if you're a violator. But you cannot club entire class with one brush, because that also sets a bad and a dangerous precedent. And like you said, the message which should go out from Indian policymakers and lawmakers is, we walk the talk. When we talk about an India which incentivizes investment, seeks technologies, looks at innovation, and we've seen the number of startups and unicorns in India have grown exponentially, that should be the message that investors all around the world see. And it's not just one sector. That has to be as a matter of stated policy, which should be constant and dynamic to meet varying situations. But the core philosophy must remain constant. It creates uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes risk. And investors are all risk averse. And in this case, you have such a large number of users who already have some form of crypto or the other. So we have to address all those issues. You don't want to leave anybody stranded midstream. So I think these become important parameters and factors which decision makers must take into account. And the judgments of the court and the principles are a good fallback measure and mechanism.
Absolutely, well said. But so like I said, RBI, other bodies have also raised certain concerns. Those concerns could stem from national security point of view. It could stem from money laundering, KYC point of view, or consumer protection of the investors fund point of view. How do we take care of all these concerns of these various bodies, and even legitimately a lot of public spirited individuals, policymakers have also raised these concerns. So how do we address these concerns?
So like you started yourself, KYC, after all, KYC has become a very effective mechanism now. Designated disclosed accounts which users will use, which are disclosed. So you have to take each of the constituents, a regulator, a law enforcement agency, user, and you have to see what is it that you can do within the fold of law or policy, which will address a concern, stroke a mischief. So a preventive mechanism to address that, like KYC is a very good example. And as and when you have newer industries, look at the number of IPOs that we've had in India in the last few months across various sectors, right? So SEBI has looked at it and has allowed. There are also new age emerging sectors. That's a dynamic process. So as and when you detect something, I mean, you look at gold, import of gold, right? There are regulations built around it because there was a time when there was a lot of smuggling of gold, but you didn't ban it completely. You sought to regulate it. Right. So that's the way you prescribe and diagnose to deal with that malaise. And that's why this effective consultation process, where you need to get domain experts who make law, viewpoint of RBI, SEBI, law enforcement agency, so that you put everything into the decision-making pot and do it. For example, if the number of users that we have in India are more, so perhaps there'll be more imports, right? Given the situation that we have at the moment. So that's a reality. We have to take that into account and come up with a solution. So idea should not be, we should go for the last resort mechanism because we can't deal with this. You have to deal with each of these issues. I mean, terror financing or, black money. These are all endemic problems that we have. And therefore, you have good enforcement agencies who are constantly monitoring it. Right? So you can have a good, effective monitoring system across agencies. Right? Give it a shot. Then there'll be learnings from it. That's why this is an evolving dynamic process. But you don't start by saying, I will stop it and nip it in the bud. Otherwise, if you look at technology and innovation, there is always disruption. But because there's disruption, you don't stall it upfront. Correct? You address that disruption through market mechanisms, through regulation, through law, through policy, through oversight. Right? That can be done. So we need a vigilant, all the agencies have to be vigilant. You don't want to leave users in a lurch. Equally, you want the benefits of this crypto to not elude India, which is why I think recently from the highest quarters, progressive statements have been made that we should also embrace it with the relevant checks and balances.
Coming to that, you were referring probably to the Honorable Prime Minister's statement recently, wherein he said, cryptos and Bitcoin, etc. We should look at global norms because it is an emerging technology. We should look at global consensus on this issue. How practical or how easy do you think it is in the near future to have a multilateral approach and build international consensus across boundaries on this issue to have a uniform kind of framework? Because this technology really transcends boundaries, and it's very difficult to have an approach in India which is different from what it is in other jurisdictions, because it's impossible to keep this within a particular border of a particular nation.
You're absolutely right. There are no territorial or geographic restrictions like the virus. It spreads. It doesn't contain itself in any particular area. And we saw that the same with safe havens all over the world. Mechanisms were made between governments through protocols for exchange of information because you didn't want tax authorities or money laundering or other vices to take place. So it's very important to have a multilateral framework for this, because this is across the globe, across the world, be it users, exchanges, aggregators, and the flow of, of assets in the different types of assets. So it is much better to look at protocols, uniform protocols, consistent protocols, so everybody can work in tandem. And as you know, law enforcement agencies also work in tandem. This is a good example, and I think the Honorable Prime Minister did set off this debate by saying it's already been raised in several multilateral forums. And second, the point that you mentioned, best practices are always of a good guidance. Sometimes a good precedent, definitely a guidance, but they have to be customized for each country and each economy. But it's always helpful to have that. And when you look at protocols and treaties, why are they in play? They're in play because they give a consistent, uniform yardstick for stakeholders and countries across the world. I think this must also go in the same way, because all central bankers will have one view, law enforcement agencies will have one view, because they look at it through their lens. But ultimately, one has to see it through the wider lens of national interest, right? And as I said, of key priorities and goals. If we are looking at becoming a 3 to 5 trillion economy, and this itself can scale it by a trillion or so as people expect it to be, or some of the other areas that you've seen significant investment, look at gaming or the successful IPOs we've had for Nika or Policy Bazaar, right? They've all happened. And then different agencies will address it. So I think having protocols and consistent frameworks across the world through cooperation and, like you said, through multilateral treaties and framework is very important. Learnings from precedents and practices in other parts of the world, very important, because some are ahead of the curve, but India is also right on the top as far as users and number of transactions are concerned. And three, engaging with stakeholders, exchanges, aggregators, you work collaboratively with them. You don't start with a trust deficit, and you can improve as things go around. And I think that's a very important way forward. I think a resolution-oriented approach, mutual respect, trust, cooperation, so that ultimately everyone works with one common purpose. After all, the job of the regulator is not to control business. He has to look at it from his point of view, brackets open, currency, what will it have impact? Law enforcement agency will look at flow, whether it's legal or illegal. So everyone will red flag their concerns. But the final has to be a national recipe. What's good for India? What's good in Indian interests? Which way is the world going? And we should also be part of that trend with necessary tweaks and safeguards, which are vital for us.
Right. Another point of debate right now is who should bear the cat really? Who should be the body which actually looks at this space? There is a view that RBI should look at it. There is a view that SEBI should look at it because it has features of currency. Some would call it assets which are close to what capital markets regulator looks at, and some are saying a completely new regulator should be formed to look at it. What is your view on who would be the best regulator for this sector?
Two things. Not in every case do we always need a regulator, because market forces should be allowed. And one of the best forms of innovation and investment is to really have a clear laid down policy, and you allow businesses to take their shape, and all these agencies keep their eyes open, they're vigilant, and they deal with it. Now, if you want to land it with SEBI as an example, right, then all that you need to do is to broad base the functioning of SEBI into this new area. So there should be people who understand this, who are working with that particular regulator, not that you just foist the same subject matter because there's an existing regulator. So knowledge building, capacity building becomes an important step in that direction, which is important. Perhaps if you put it in the domain of RBI, it will send alarm bells because of stand and a view they've already taken. But for example, for data protection now or for e-commerce, we are likely to have a full-fledged new regulator. Right. So all these options must be explored once we know what the contours of the law is going to be. If there's a good, robust legal structure, then perhaps existing people with, like I said, added expertise and knowledge building to understand this sector, enter into it. If not, you want to create one overarching central regulator, new age regulator. His DNA is different and his date of birth coincides with the date of birth of new age sectors. That's also important because then he'll bring fresh thinking. You don't have the legacy of the past. So sometimes I feel with pre-existing regulators, a large part of what they've done influences the future because there's
Right.
many years of that. But this needs a fresh start. As they would say in cricket, take a fresh guard, start
Right.
on a clean slate. So perhaps you can man it with such people. For example, in the electricity sector, you have a regulator and an appellate body. Then in the gas sector, you have a regulator, but the same appellate body sits as electricity, but with experts from petroleum and gas. So it has the same name, but experts from that sector sit on the decision making. So they bring their expertise. So we could perhaps have an extended SEBI. I'm just giving as an example, right? To deal with this specifically.
And, final question. I was reading today that, this bulletin, just these two lines in the Lok Sabha, bulletin that government is introducing a bill that can ban private cryptocurrencies and promote a central bank digital currency, set off alarm bells for the last 2-3 months in the whole sector. And I was reading, investors have become jittery. The retail investors who put in money, the crypto exchanges are seeing decline in the business, withdrawals, and thinner trading volumes. How important do you think is it to get conclusive certainty ASAP for this sector, and whether the government should come out with its stand very clearly at the earliest? And what timelines do you personally see, given your experience of decision making, for this certainty or clarity to emerge?
So firstly, alarm bells should make way for jingle bells because we're Christmas, New Year time. So that festive thing must pervade even in lawmaking. Secondly, anything left for too long creates needless debate, speculation,
Right.
apprehension. So it's time, given that the government had announced they were likely to introduce the bill in the last session, right? I think that should, the position of having, as you said, complete clarity is of utmost importance and utmost priority, because we don't want, as you said, de facto discussions or debates to happen without knowing what is in the offing. Second, if they feel it requires more public consultation, right, since the bill has not been introduced, I think it's not a bad idea to have a much wider public consultation, get a lot more experts, right? So your formulation has to be right. And if I'm not mistaken, the Chief Justice recently said that legislation which sometimes comes as hasty, it adds to litigation, it goes through a court challenge. We don't want that. So issue must have clarity, certainty, and hopefully finality. But the way things are going, I don't see this happen round the corner unless you have a collaborative approach saying, let's take everybody on board and then embark on this process so the final product broadly has buy-in and support, right? Rather than a full-on dispute and litigation, because then you move from lawmaking to courts to disputes, which also results in uncertainty. You don't have closure. And as you know, as somebody put it well, there's a lot of investment out there, but it's a question of who attracts it. So if we miss it, then perhaps, as you said, we could be a loser in this, which India shouldn't be, given the current mood and the trend and expectation that the next decade is going to be India's decade. So I think timing is very critical, as you say, and leaving issues open-ended is to nobody's advantage at all. And it's not that transactions are not happening, right? So at the same time, it's on full swing. So I think, as you said, a swift decision, I think, becomes very important. And New Age India should be like that. They should commit to a timeline. And second, I forgot to say this upfront, there must be a what is called an impact assessment. Before you introduce a legislation or a policy, you must have an impact assessment of where it will land. And one other form of regulation, sorry, I should have mentioned it upfront, is either self-regulation or co-regulation. So one hybrid model in response to your question could also be this. And self-regulation is a good measure. We are seeing it in a whole lot of sectors. Government itself allowed it in the OTT sector to have one tier of self-regulation. You can have co-regulation to start with, but heavy-handed regulation, that phase and era should really, rest and be a matter of the past. So good thoughts, long-term, futuristic, on an India first basis, not a regulator, a stakeholder, and understanding the nature of the territory, the market, the sector, because we have so many new age sectors which are happening, right? Growing businesses is very important. So trust the expert in whose hand you should leave it and let him come up. Like with the virus, we trust our epidemiologists, etc., and saying, look, you tell us what should be done. So I think that should be the model in New India for lawmakers to actually frame and debate the law, but its creation, its content must emanate from experts, knowledgeable experts.
I hope the government is listening to this, and hopefully by the budget session we'll have more clarity, certainty.
Jay, sometimes walls have ears, so even this four corners of the Zoom may have ears. So we are sending a good message, and I hope everyone has open ears and takes it that when we transit into a new year, we must start on a clean slate. We don't want the farmers' bill kind of situation to come. We want it to be resolved. So a resolution mechanism, I think, is very important, and we should strive for that. And this could be a good example of that.
Absolutely, and hopefully government is listening to all stakeholders and will come up with something concrete in the next 2-3 months, maybe even by the budget session. Thank you, Mr. Gopal Jain, for your time.
You should end with a tagline: "Lend me your ear."
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll fill it in with good thoughts.
Thank you, sir, for taking out the time, even though you are on a holiday. Wishing you and all our viewers a very happy New Year 2022. Hope everyone stays safe and healthy. And if you enjoyed this conversation, do hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our YouTube channel and like the video, and do subscribe to our social media pages also given in the YouTube description below. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jay.
See you on the other side of the year.